When most people think about building muscle, they imagine protein shakes, big plates of pasta, and the idea that carbohydrates are absolutely essential for growth. We've all heard it. You need carbs to build muscle. But is that really true? Or is it just another nutrition myth that's been repeated so often we stop questioning it? The truth is your body has remarkable metabolic flexibility. Muscle doesn't grow because of carbs, it grows because of stimulus, amino acids, and hormones like insulin and growth factors. And here's where it gets exciting. A low-carb, ketogenic diet doesn't just preserve muscle. It may actually create an environment where your body becomes more efficient at using fat for fuel, sparing glycogen and protecting lean tissue. So today, let's dive into the science and see whether you can in fact build strong, powerful muscle while staying in ketosis. Spoiler alert, you can, and the mechanisms might surprise you. Muscle growth has long been associated with the idea that carbohydrates are the foundation for building strength and size, but this is a common misconception. The reality is that muscle development is primarily dependent on two essential factors: the intake of adequate protein and the consistent application of resistance training. Carbohydrates may play a supportive role in energy availability, but they are not the direct drivers of muscle synthesis. To truly understand how muscle grows, we need to look at what happens within the body when you lift weights and consume protein. When you perform resistance training, whether it is lifting weights, doing body weight exercises, or using resistance bands, you create tiny amounts of stress and micro tears in the muscle fibers. This is not a negative process. It is the very trigger that signals the body to repair and adapt. The repair mechanism is what leads to muscle growth, also called hypertrophy. In order for this process to be effective, your body requires the building blocks of protein, amino acids. These amino acids are what the body uses to rebuild the damaged muscle fibers, making them thicker, stronger, and more resilient to future stress. Without sufficient protein, the body lacks the raw material necessary for this repair process. Carbohydrates, on the other hand, do not directly contribute to muscle repair or growth. They can provide a source of quick energy during exercise, but the presence or absence of carbs does not determine whether or not the muscle will grow. Even in a low-carb or ketogenic state, the body is fully capable of fueling resistance training through fat oxidation and glycogen sparing. The essential element is the protein intake paired with consistent mechanical tension from training. The misconception that carbs are indispensable stems largely from the bodybuilding world, where high-carb diets are often promoted for fueling long, high-volume training sessions. While carbs may offer convenience for quick energy, they are not a requirement for growth itself. Protein, particularly high-quality sources rich in essential amino acids like leucine, is what triggers muscle protein synthesis. This process is the actual mechanism by which new muscle tissue is built. Studies show that even in the absence of high carbohydrate intake, sufficient protein combined with resistance exercise stimulates muscle growth effectively. For example, individuals on ketogenic diets who maintain adequate protein levels and perform strength training see comparable gains in muscle mass to those on higher carb diets. This demonstrates that the body's anabolic machinery depends on protein and mechanical stress, not carbohydrate intake. Another factor to consider is the role of hormones in muscle development. While insulin is often labeled as an anabolic hormone, its role is more about preventing breakdown of muscle rather than directly building it. Amino acids and resistance training stimulate growth pathways independently of insulin spikes from carbohydrate consumption. Growth factors like mTOR are activated by amino acids, especially leucine, and by the physical stress of lifting weights. This means that you can effectively build muscle even with lower insulin levels, provided your protein intake and training stimulus are sufficient. It is also important to highlight that relying heavily on carbohydrates can sometimes overshadow metabolic health. Chronic high-carb diets, particularly with processed and refined sources, can lead to issues like insulin resistance and fat gain, which ultimately undermine long-term muscle health and overall performance. In contrast, focusing on protein and strength training while minimizing unnecessary carbohydrates can optimize body composition, allowing individuals to build lean muscle while keeping fat levels under control. The takeaway is clear: muscle growth is not about how many carbs you eat, but rather how much high-quality protein you consume and how consistently you challenge your muscles through resistance training. Carbs may be optional fuel, But protein and training are non-negotiable requirements. Whether you are eating high carb, low carb, or ketogenic, the principle remains the same. The combination of resistance exercise and adequate protein is what drives muscle growth. By shifting the focus away from carbohydrate dependency and toward these true drivers of muscle development, we free ourselves from outdated myths and empower people to achieve strength and resilience in a metabolically healthy way. One of the most fascinating aspects of a low-carb ketogenic diet is the role ketones play in protecting muscle tissue. Traditionally, people have feared that cutting carbohydrates would lead to muscle loss, under the assumption that the body would break down protein to meet its energy needs. While this concern may sound logical on the surface, the reality is very different. When the body enters a state of ketosis, it produces ketone bodies, mainly beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone, which serve as a highly efficient alternative fuel source. These ketones do more than just replace glucose for energy. They also actively protect muscle mass by reducing protein breakdown. Under normal conditions, when carbohydrate intake is low and glucose availability is limited, but the body could potentially turn to breaking down muscle protein to release amino acids that can be converted into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. This is the scenario that worries many people when they consider lowering carbs. However, when ketosis is established, the production of ketones reduces the body's need to rely on protein for energy. Ketones supply fuel for the brain, muscles, and other tissues, sparing amino acids from being broken down. In essence, ketones step in to preserve lean tissue that would otherwise be sacrificed. Beta-hydroxybutyrate, the primary ketone body in circulation during ketosis, has been shown to exert anti-catabolic effects. This means it directly lowers the rate at which proteins are degraded in the body. Scientific studies have observed that in a ketogenic state, levels of muscle protein breakdown decrease significantly compared to conditions where the body is deprived of both carbohydrates and ketones. This is why a well-formulated ketogenic diet is not the same as simple starvation. The presence of ketones changes the entire metabolic landscape. Another important aspect of ketones protecting muscle is their efficiency as a fuel source. Ketones provide more energy per unit of oxygen consumed compared to glucose or fatty acids. This means tissues can generate energy with less metabolic stress, further reducing the need to break down protein for fuel. For athletes or individuals engaging in resistance training, this efficiency translates into sustained performance without jeopardizing lean body mass. Instead of relying heavily on glycogen and risking protein loss, the body learns to function optimally using fat and ketones while keeping muscles intact. There is also evidence that ketones influence signaling pathways related to muscle preservation. For example, ketones may reduce the activation of pathways that trigger proteolysis, the breakdown of muscle protein. At the same time, adequate protein intake and resistance exercise stimulate the pathways responsible for muscle growth, such as mTOR. This creates a favorable balance. Protein breakdown is minimized while protein synthesis is encouraged, resulting in the maintenance or even growth of lean mass despite lower carbohydrate intake. From a practical standpoint, this protective role of ketones becomes especially important during calorie deficits, fasting, or weight loss efforts. One of the greatest challenges in dieting is losing muscle along with fat. When people restrict calories but continue consuming carbohydrates, they often experience significant muscle loss because the body still demands glucose, which encourages protein breakdown. In contrast, ketogenic diets shift the energy source away from glucose, lowering the pressure on amino acids and safeguarding muscle. This makes ketogenic nutrition a powerful strategy not only for fat loss but also for long-term preservation of metabolic health and physical strength. It is also worth noting that ketones exert anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects, which indirectly contribute to muscle preservation. Chronic inflammation and oxidative stress can accelerate muscle wasting over time. By reducing these stressors, ketones create a more favorable internal environment for maintaining muscle integrity. Combined with sufficient dietary protein and resistance exercise, this creates a robust foundation for both muscle preservation and growth. In summary, ketones are not merely an alternative energy source, they are a protective mechanism for lean body mass. By reducing protein breakdown, they help preserve the very tissue that defines strength, mobility, and metabolic resilience. Far from the outdated fear that a low-carb ketogenic diet inevitably causes muscle loss, the evidence shows that ketones act as guardians of muscle. They reduce the demand for protein as fuel, spare amino acids for essential repair and growth, and create conditions that favor strength and longevity. For anyone pursuing muscle health on a ketogenic diet, this protection is one of the greatest metabolic advantages available. One of the most powerful adaptations that occurs when following a low-carb diet is the body's ability to enhance fat oxidation. This shift means that instead of depending heavily on carbohydrates and glycogen as the primary fuel source, the body becomes increasingly efficient at using fat for energy. This metabolic flexibility not only supports endurance and overall energy balance, but also plays an important role in sparing glycogen for moments when it is truly needed, such as during high-intensity efforts. By prioritizing fat as the main energy source, low-carb diets create a more sustainable system of fueling that benefits both athletic performance and long-term metabolic health. In a typical high-carbohydrate diet, the body depends on glycogen, which is stored in the liver and muscles, to provide energy during exercise and daily activity. However, glycogen stores are limited, often only lasting for a few hours of moderate activity or less during intense efforts. Once these stores are depleted, performance tends to drop sharply, leading to what many endurance athletes describe as hitting the wall. In contrast, fat stores in the body are far more abundant even in lean individuals. By training the body to rely more on fat oxidation, low-carb diets tap into this virtually limitless source of energy, reducing dependence on glycogen and extending performance capacity. When carbohydrate intake is restricted, the body increases enzymes and pathways that allow fatty acids to be mobilized and oxidized more efficiently. This metabolic adaptation is sometimes referred to as becoming fat-adapted. As fat oxidation rises, glycogen breakdown is slowed, and the precious stores of glycogen are preserved. This glycogen-sparing effect becomes particularly valuable during high-intensity activities where carbohydrates are still the preferred fuel source. The result is that instead of depleting glycogen rapidly during all forms of activity, the body reserves it for when it is most needed. Short bursts of strength, sprinting, or explosive movements. For athletes, this adaptation can change the entire performance landscape. Endurance athletes on a low-carb diet often report greater energy stability, fewer crashes in performance, and the ability to sustain longer training sessions without the need for constant carbohydrate refueling. At the same time, when high-intensity demands arise, such as a final sprint or a heavy lift, the glycogen stores that were preserved are available to provide that quick burst of energy. This dual advantage of fat adaptation combined with glycogen sparing ensures that performance is not only sustained but also strategically supported. Another important consideration is how this metabolic shift supports overall health. Relying heavily on carbohydrates means frequent spikes in blood sugar and insulin, which can lead to insulin resistance and fat storage over time. By lowering carb intake and enhancing fat oxidation, insulin sensitivity improves and the body becomes better at regulating blood sugar. This has benefits far beyond athletic performance, extending to weight management, reduced risk of chronic disease, and improved metabolic resilience. At the same time, muscle glycogen is not chronically depleted but carefully managed, ensuring that both energy systems, fat and carbohydrate, are used in the most efficient way possible. Some critics argue that low-carb diets impair performance by reducing glycogen availability, but this overlooks the body's remarkable ability to adapt. Research has shown that athletes who are fat-adapted not only maintain glycogen levels, but also use them more strategically during high-intensity work. Rather than burning through glycogen indiscriminately, their bodies rely primarily on fat during steady effort and turn to glycogen only when absolutely necessary. This shift prevents early depletion and extends the duration and quality of performance. This efficiency also benefits non-athletes who simply want to maintain energy throughout the day. Many people who follow a low-carb lifestyle notice fewer energy crashes and a greater sense of stamina because fat provides a steady, reliable source of fuel. They are less dependent on frequent meals or snacks to maintain blood sugar levels, and they can engage in both daily activity and exercise without worrying about constantly topping off glycogen stores with carbs. In conclusion, low-carb diets do much more than reduce carbohydrate intake. They reprogram the body's metabolism to rely on fat as the primary fuel source, dramatically enhancing fat oxidation. This adaptation preserves glycogen for high-intensity needs, creating a system that is both efficient and sustainable. Instead of constantly running on a limited tank of glycogen, The body taps into abundant fat reserves, leaving glycogen available for explosive efforts when it matters most. The result is improved endurance, greater stability of energy, and a healthier metabolic profile overall. Far from being a disadvantage, the ability to enhance fat oxidation and spare glycogen is one of the greatest strengths of a low-carb lifestyle. For decades, insulin has been described as the ultimate anabolic hormone, the key driver of muscle growth and preservation. While it is true that insulin plays a role in reducing protein breakdown, it is far from being the sole or even the most important anabolic signal for building muscle. Muscle growth depends on a much more complex interplay of factors, including amino acids, particularly essential ones like leucine, and powerful growth signals such as mTOR and other cellular pathways. To believe that insulin alone dictates muscle gain is to oversimplify a process that is far more nuanced. In reality, amino acids and growth factors matter more in driving muscle protein synthesis, and this understanding is crucial when considering diets that do not rely heavily on insulin spikes from carbohydrates. When protein is consumed, it is broken down into amino acids, the fundamental building blocks of muscle. Among these, branched-chain amino acids, and especially leucine, play a unique role in activating the mTOR pathway, which is the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis. This pathway essentially flips the switch that tells muscle cells to start building new tissue. Importantly, this activation can occur independently of insulin. Even in low insulin environments, as seen in low-carb or ketogenic diets, the presence of sufficient amino acids is enough to stimulate muscle growth. This is why dietary protein quality and adequacy are far more important to hypertrophy than carbohydrate intake or insulin spikes. With insulin's role in muscle is better understood as anti-catabolic rather than directly anabolic. In other words, it helps prevent the breakdown of muscle tissue by suppressing proteolysis, the process of protein degradation. However, preventing muscle loss is not the same as stimulating new muscle growth. To grow muscle, the body requires signals that turn on protein synthesis, and these signals are primarily provided by amino acids and mechanical stress from resistance training. This explains why people can successfully build muscle on diets that minimize carbohydrate intake and therefore limit insulin spikes, because insulin is not the main growth trigger in the first place. Growth factors also play a central role in muscle development. Hormones like growth hormone and IGF-1's insulin like growth factor work alongside amino acids to promote anabolic signaling. These hormones stimulate pathways that increase protein synthesis, encourage muscle repair, and enhance recovery. Resistance training itself further amplifies these signals by creating mechanical stress that activates satellite cells, the helper cells that donate nuclei to growing muscle fibers. This combination of amino acid availability, hormonal growth factors, and training-induced stress creates a powerful anabolic environment, regardless of whether insulin levels are elevated by carbohydrates. Another important dimension is the timing and distribution of protein intake. Muscle protein synthesis is not a constant process. It requires repeated stimulation throughout the day. Consuming high-quality protein sources that provide sufficient leucine at each meal ensures that the mTOR pathway is activated multiple times, maximizing growth potential. This again underscores the point that amino acid availability is the critical driver, not fluctuations in insulin from carbohydrate consumption. Someone eating a high-carb diet but consuming inadequate protein will not achieve optimal growth, whereas someone on a low-carb diet who prioritizes protein intake will continue to build muscle effectively. The myth of insulin as the dominant anabolic hormone persists largely because of its visible effects on blood sugar and its ability to inhibit protein breakdown. However, research consistently shows that beyond this anti-catabolic function, insulin's ability to stimulate muscle protein synthesis is minimal once a baseline level is reached. In fact, studies demonstrate that increasing insulin above normal fasting levels does not further enhance protein synthesis unless amino acids are also present. This means insulin alone is insufficient to grow muscle. It is the synergy of amino acids, resistance training, and growth factors that drives the process. Understanding this distinction helps break the misconception that carbohydrates are required for muscle growth simply because they elevate insulin. The truth is, what matters most is consistent resistance training, adequate protein intake with a focus on essential amino acids, and the presence of growth factors that naturally rise with exercise and recovery. With these elements in place, Muscle growth is entirely achievable in a low-carb or ketogenic context without relying on insulin spikes from high carbohydrate consumption. In summary, while insulin plays a role in preserving muscle, it is not the master anabolic signal it is often portrayed to be. Amino acids, particularly leucine, activate the critical pathways for muscle growth, and growth factors further amplify these signals. Resistance training provides the mechanical stress necessary to trigger repair and adaptation. Together, these elements form the real foundation of muscle building. Insulin may support the process by preventing breakdown, but it is not the driver. Recognizing this shifts the focus away from carbohydrates as a supposed requirement for growth and places it where it belongs, on protein, training, and the body's powerful growth mechanisms that function independently of insulin spikes. A ketogenic diet is often discussed in the context of weight loss or blood sugar control, but one of its overlooked benefits is the way it supports long-term muscle preservation through improved metabolic health. The state of our metabolism directly influences whether we build, maintain, or lose muscle over time. Factors like insulin sensitivity, inflammation, mitochondrial function, and hormonal balance all play crucial roles in muscle health, and a ketogenic diet positively impacts each of these. By creating a more efficient and resilient metabolic environment, ketosis sets the stage not only for fat loss but also for the preservation of lean body mass that is essential for strength, mobility, and longevity. One of the most significant threats to muscle health is insulin resistance. When cells become resistant to insulin, the body struggles to regulate blood sugar effectively, often leading to chronically elevated insulin levels and metabolic dysfunction. Over time, this state contributes to muscle breakdown and impaired muscle protein synthesis. A ketogenic diet improves insulin sensitivity by lowering glucose exposure and reducing the constant demand for high insulin output. With improved sensitivity, muscles are better able to use nutrients efficiently, supporting repair and growth. This metabolic shift helps protect muscle against the erosion that often accompanies metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. Chronic inflammation is another factor that accelerates muscle loss. Inflammatory molecules interfere with anabolic signaling, making it harder for the body to build and preserve muscle, even in the presence of adequate protein and training. Ketogenic diets have been shown to lower systemic inflammation by reducing insulin levels, decreasing oxidative stress, and shifting the body's energy reliance toward fats and ketones. Ketones themselves, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate, have direct anti-inflammatory effects, calming cellular stress responses. This reduction in inflammation provides a more favorable environment for muscle preservation, allowing anabolic signals to function effectively. Mitochondrial health is equally important in the conversation about muscle. Mitochondria are the energy powerhouses of our cells, and their decline with age is a key factor in sarcopenia, the progressive loss of muscle mass and function. Ketogenic diets enhance mitochondrial biogenesis and efficiency, meaning the body produces more robust and efficient energy factories within muscle cells. With stronger mitochondrial function, muscles can sustain energy demands better and resist fatigue, ultimately helping to preserve muscle performance and quality over the long term. Hormonal balance also benefits from ketogenic nutrition. Elevated insulin and poor metabolic health often disrupt hormones like growth hormone, testosterone, and IGF-1, all of which are critical for muscle preservation. By stabilizing blood sugar and lowering excess insulin, ketogenic diets allow these anabolic hormones to function more effectively. The improved balance creates a hormonal environment more supportive of maintaining and repairing muscle tissue. Another key point is how ketogenic diets influence body composition. Carrying excess fat, particularly visceral fat, contributes to metabolic dysfunction and increases the risk of muscle loss. A ketogenic diet promotes fat loss while preserving lean mass, shifting body composition in a healthier direction. By reducing fat stores and improving metabolic markers such as triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, and fasting glucose, the body is better positioned to maintain muscle as people age. Muscle is not preserved in isolation. It is sustained as part of an overall healthy system where metabolism is stable and efficient. Ketones themselves add another protective layer. Beta-hydroxybutyrate not only serves as a clean and efficient fuel, but also reduces protein breakdown in muscle. This anti-catabolic effect ensures that muscle tissue is spared even during periods of calorie restriction, fasting, or weight loss. Many people worry that dieting inevitably means losing muscle along with fat, But ketogenic diets demonstrate that this does not have to be the case. By prioritizing fat as the main energy source and protecting protein, ketosis provides a safeguard for lean mass. Ultimately, metabolic health is the foundation for muscle health, and ketogenic diets directly target the root causes of metabolic decline. By improving insulin sensitivity, lowering inflammation, enhancing mitochondrial function, optimizing hormones, and providing ketones as a muscle-sparing fuel, ketogenic nutrition supports the long-term preservation of muscle mass and function. This is especially important as we age, when the risk of sarcopenia rises and the consequences of muscle loss, frailty, reduced mobility, and loss of independence become more severe. A ketogenic diet is not just about short-term weight control, it is about protecting muscle and ensuring strength and resilience over a lifetime. Yes, you can build and maintain muscle effectively on a ketogenic diet, despite the common belief that carbohydrates are absolutely necessary for strength and growth. The science and practical experience both demonstrate that what truly drives muscle building is not the presence of carbs, but the combination of adequate protein intake, resistance training, and a favorable hormonal and metabolic environment. A ketogenic diet provides all of these conditions while offering additional benefits that make it not only possible but sustainable to build and preserve lean mass over the long term. The foundation of muscle growth is protein, and ketogenic diets emphasize sufficient, high-quality protein sources. When protein is consumed, it is broken down into amino acids, which directly stimulate muscle protein synthesis through pathways like mTOR. Essential amino acids, especially leucine, trigger the signals necessary for building new muscle tissue. This process is not dependent on carbohydrates. In fact, studies have shown that individuals following ketogenic diets who maintain appropriate protein levels and train with resistance exercises can achieve muscle growth equal to those on high carbohydrate diets. This proves that the absence of large carbohydrate loads does not impair the body's ability to build new muscle. Resistance training is the second essential pillar of muscle development. Mechanical tension, progressive overload, and muscle fiber recruitment stimulate the adaptations necessary for growth. These responses occur regardless of the dietary carbohydrate content, provided energy demands are met. On a ketogenic diet, fat and ketones serve as efficient energy sources for sustained training, while glycogen is preserved for high-intensity moments. This combination ensures that performance in the gym is not compromised, and in some cases, it is even enhanced by the greater metabolic efficiency that ketosis provides. Another reason muscle building is effective on a ketogenic diet is the muscle-sparing effect of ketones. Beta-hydroxybutyrate reduces protein breakdown, protecting lean tissue even during calorie deficits or fasting. This is a critical advantage because muscle loss is a common risk during weight loss phases. On a typical calorie-restricted, high-carb diet, the body often turns to muscle protein for fuel once glycogen is depleted. In contrast, ketogenic diets rely on fat and ketones, sparing amino acids for repair and growth rather than energy production. This anti-catabolic effect makes it easier to preserve and build muscle while losing fat. Hormonal health further supports muscle growth in a ketogenic context. Lowering carbohydrate intake reduces chronically elevated insulin, improves insulin sensitivity, and stabilizes blood sugar levels. This creates a healthier internal environment where anabolic hormones, such as growth hormone and testosterone, can function more effectively. Rather than relying on frequent insulin spikes from carbs, muscle building on keto leverages the body's natural anabolic signals, resistance training, amino acids, and growth factors to drive progress. The result is a leaner, more metabolically stable physique that is not dependent on constant carbohydrate intake. Another benefit is the improvement in body composition. Many individuals find that ketogenic diets help them reduce excess fat while preserving muscle mass, leading to a more defined and functional physique. This body recomposition effect is particularly valuable for athletes, older adults, or anyone seeking both strength and metabolic health. By preserving lean tissue while reducing fat, ketogenic diets help people achieve a healthier balance that supports long-term performance and longevity. It is important to note that building muscle on keto still requires the same fundamentals as any diet: progressive resistance training, adequate rest and recovery, and consistent protein intake. The difference is that ketogenic nutrition provides a metabolic framework that reduces protein breakdown, enhances fat oxidation, and spares glycogen for when it is most needed. This makes it not only possible but practical to build and maintain muscle without depending on high carbohydrate consumption. In conclusion, the belief that carbs are essential for muscle growth is outdated. The true drivers of muscle building, protein, resistance training, and anabolic signaling remain fully intact on a ketogenic diet. Ketones provide an added layer of muscle protection, metabolic health is improved, and glycogen is preserved for high-intensity demands. Yes, you can build and maintain muscle effectively on a ketogenic diet, and doing so often leads to greater strength, resilience, and long-term health than following traditional carbohydrate-heavy approaches.